Story from r/MaliciousCompliance user must have done available. Tell you, in front of your other customers and employees, why I don't want you as a provider. Sure. This happened around 2012 and involves my internet provider. They were terrible, days without internet and no warnings. The last straw was when there was no internet for over 2 weeks. I called them, and they said they'd send someone to check, but nope, no one came. I went to their branch office, and finally, one of the higher-ups put on his big boy pants and got to work. As an apology, they told me they'd only charge me for the days I had internet. It took 3 more days for the service to be restored. Then the bill arrived, and it was higher than what I should have been paying. I went to the branch office the same day I got the bill. Before I could explain my grievance, the employee told me I'd have to pay a penalty since I'd be late in paying. That just made me blow my gasket. They wouldn't explain anything to me, so I told them I was done. I didn't want them as my provider anymore. I was there at 9 a.m. and didn't leave until 2 p.m. They really tried to get me to stay, but when they realized I was firm in my decision, they finally complied. One of the things I had to do was call one of their reps to explain my reasons for dropping them. The phones were by the entrance and waiting room. I went there, and some assistant was watching me like I'd committed a horrible crime. I called, and it took nearly 10 minutes to get someone on the line. When they finally answered, they asked for a list of my problems with them. Not sure why, as they hadn't cared before. So, I proceeded to tell them every single screw-up they had made and explained the last straw. This was all in front of waiting customers and those coming in. The assistant looked embarrassed and ready to murder me. It got worse, several customers walked out after hearing me. When it was over, even one of the managers tried to guilt-trip me for talking bad about them. I paid the bill and the penalty, but by that time, they were eager to get me out quickly. I got a better internet provider. I also had the last laugh when I lambasted them on Facebook, where a lot of comments piled on about how awful they were. Next story is from r/MaliciousCompliance user Not Your Nanny. I have great respect for accountants, but any competent accountant has at least a touch of OCD. It's really necessary for them to do their job properly, but some have more of it than most. At one time, we had a controller who really put the obsessive in obsessive-compulsive. She decided we were being a little too fast and loose with the company credit card, which, at that point, we were. So, she created a payment request form and wrote a policy to go with it. The form wasn't unreasonable, in fact, we still use it today. The policy, however, was another story. The form was to be used, per the policy, for all uses of the company credit card, which we used for everything because the owner got airline miles on it. It had a 6-figure limit, and it wasn't unusual for us to make a mid-month payment to keep from going over. He got a lot of miles. All uses, no matter how small, required the form. The policy? Each form had to be signed by either the owner or 2 higher-ups, one of whom was frequently out of the office. I'm the IT guy, and we're a retail store chain, a pretty successful one, so there are a lot of IT issues that are extremely time-sensitive. Gotta keep the cash registers running at full speed, but many of these problems could be fixed with very cheap parts. Yet, I was having to get signatures to order $25 parts online. Every time. With one of the required signatures being from someone who was in the office less often than the owner. So, it was pretty obvious to me that the correct solution was to have the owner sign it all by himself. He always understood, if I told him a cash register was down, he got it. I do like working for smart people. That worked until the day I took the 3rd form into his office within an hour for his signature, because one of the other 2 people who could sign was out of town. He told me he'd look into this as he signed it. By the time I walked by the controller's office on the way back to mine, he was already there, having a very polite, professional conversation with her. From that day forward, the executive VP, who'd been with the company since the beginning and was trusted as much as the owner's own family, could sign my forms by himself. I now also have signature authority up to $500, as well as my own company credit card, with a much smaller limit. Next story. Schedule a meeting at 12 a.m.? Sure. I've been working as a lead in an IT firm in India that supports a US client. I have a manager here in India who approves my PTO, handles performance reviews, and meets with us a few times a month. His and the management's view is that, although we work for the client, we should also contribute to the organization. So, we're encouraged to take on additional tasks like recruiting or preparing business reviews. Essentially, we need to be available during the day. I also have another manager in the USA, who is also Indian. He coordinates with the customer and handles any escalations related to our work. His main concern is ensuring that there are zero escalations from the client. The clients assign us projects, and we interact with them directly. We have meetings every day, usually lasting at least 2 hours. Since we're paid a monthly salary, there's no extra money for additional hours worked. Both managers take advantage of this. There are no strict working hours, but we must be available from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. IST, which corresponds to 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. US time. Typically, we start working at 10 a.m., continue until 5 p.m., and then resume from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Sometimes, meetings with clients extend an extra 30 minutes to an hour. Our US manager connects with us after the client meetings. One day, I had a lot of work to finish, so I decided to work from home instead of commuting. I had a 3-hour client meeting followed by a knowledge transition session, so I was fully occupied. The on-site manager asked me to schedule a meeting with him. I told him my day was packed until midnight. He refused to reschedule and said he needed 30 minutes of my time. I asked if he could join a little earlier before my meetings, but he said no. Then I asked, "Is 12 a.m. fine for you?" He said yes, and I scheduled the meeting for 12 a.m., all of this happening over Teams chat. I decided to use his own words against him, so I scheduled the meeting for 12 a.m. his time, which was 10 a.m. the next day for me, thinking, if you expect me to be available at midnight, why not you? That was the last time he expected me to be available after midnight. Next story. You're never too young for malicious compliance. I was cutting bread and remembered this bit of MC from my youth in Argentina. I have a couple of cousins whose grandpa, not mine, on the other side of the family, used to be the town baker when I was around 5 or 6 years old. Picture a small town with the town's bakery kind of place. The bakery included a chicken coop for eggs, Grandpa Baker's house, a huge oven and prepping area, a storage room with piles of flour sacks as high as mountains, a well for water, a pantry, an office, and the bakery itself. Huge, huge place, probably more than 100 meters long and 50 meters wide. For me and my older cousin, who was about my age, being let loose there was like the ultimate playground. We could climb mountains of flour sacks, try to catch chickens, run from the store to the back, but the biggest thing ever. There were a lot of amazing baked goods to eat. So much so that they had to close the store during Grandma Baker's nap time because we would sneak in and go on a rampage. Grandpa Baker worked night shifts until around 10 to 11 a.m., so he was out cold until 5 to 6 p.m. every day. Both my cousin and I had baby brothers at the time, so our moms couldn't keep an eye on us all day. The rampaging kept getting out of hand, so Grandma Baker called my cousin and me over and said, "Look, while I'm taking a nap, you can't have any baked goods or anything the store sells. Am I clear?" "Yes, Grandma Baker." If you've ever been to Argentina, you probably know what dulce de leche is. To Argentinians, it's probably the most delicious thing ever. Think peanut butter or chocolate spread, but 10 times better. And it's not a baked good. And the store doesn't sell it. But the pantry was full of it because it was used in baked goods, think croissants with dulce de leche inside. You know where this is going, right? Wooden spoon in hand, the kind you use to stir a stew. My cousin and I snuck into the pantry and probably ate something like half a kilo or more of dulce de leche each. Malicious compliance, and a huge stomachache later, never tasted so good. TLDR, Grandma Baker forbids us from eating baked goods, so we eat the most delicious ingredient of them all. Our next story. The unpromotables. We applied for every position we were qualified for. In the USA, government jobs are under the civil service system to ensure jobs are awarded based on what you know, not who you know. For example, to qualify for an entry-level accounting job, you need a Bachelor of Science in Accounting. Periodically, exams are given, and the top scorers are prioritized for jobs, following the rule of 3, where the job must go to one of the 3 highest-scoring candidates willing to accept it. Managers and politicians hate this system. At my state agency, a group of us consistently scored at the top of promotion exams. We had strong work records, awards for productivity and innovation, and no major disciplinary marks, except maybe a counseling memo, less than a formal write-up, like, "Boss told employee not to do X again." But we had issues. We'd say things like, "Why are we doing this way? It's inefficient." Bosses didn't like that. We also brought offensive materials into the workplace, like, "Look, it says here in Chapter 10, Section Y of Z state law that we're doing this wrong." Bosses really didn't like that either. So there we were, A group of highly qualified employees sitting at the top of the promotion lists. But management wanted to promote others who were lower on those lists. Legally, if 3 of us applied, interviewed, and said yes to a promotion, one of us had to get the job. We started calling each other, "Did you apply for X promotion?" We soon became a support group, occasionally meeting for lunch or drinks, and called ourselves the Unpromotables. Then we had an idea: why only apply for jobs we wanted? This is where the malicious compliance began. We started applying for every promotion we qualified for, regardless of the job, boss, or work environment. And when asked if we'd accept, we all said yes. We heard this drove management insane. Their favorites, the teachers' pets and brown-nosers, wanted promotions, but we blocked them. Whenever management tried something shady, they learned we knew our rights under state civil service law inside and out. It was both amusing and frustrating to see positions left unfilled because they refused to promote any of us. The other employees weren't thrilled either, as they had to pick up the slack without extra pay. I was once offered a promotion. The hiring manager had started onboarding me, but the big boss blocked it because they didn't want to lose me in my old position. That boss blocked my promotions for over a decade. There isn't a happy ending. This continued until I took early retirement at 55. I'd planned to work longer, but 30-plus years of toxic workplace politics wore down my physical and mental health. Thanks to everyone who responded. Hearing that this happens to others really boosted my self-esteem and will help with my healing journey. It's wild to feel so conditioned to have negative views on mental health care that I hesitated to type healing journey. Thanks for listening. Our next story is Let Your Best Employee Go? I'll take it all down with me. This happened a couple of years ago, but I was recently reminded of it. I worked for a company handling media design, graphic design, photography, live event AV, video editing, etc. This company held big events, and over my years there, I was given more and more unrelated responsibilities until I was essentially doing the work of 4 people. They never helped pay for any materials, so I ended up buying all the necessary media equipment myself. Everything had my name on it to ensure it wouldn't get lost if I lent it out. Over time, I had built up an impressive supply through second-hand purchases and finding deals. By my 5th year, I had invested thousands of dollars in high-end equipment, which was essential for almost every part of the organization's promotions and events. You might already see where this is going. One day, I was called into my boss's office and told they were downsizing. They'd hired someone fresh out of college, with no real-life experience, to take over my job, as well as a few others. I was completely blindsided. Then they had someone from corporate accompany me back to my office to help me clean out my stuff. He specifically said, "Take everything that is yours. You won't be coming back." So, that's exactly what I did. They expected the usual small box with a couple of personal items, but instead, we hauled crate after crate of media and event supplies to my car. I drove a 2004 Ford Explorer, and by the time I left, it was filled to the brim. With each box we carried out, my boss's face grew more panicked. At one point, he said, "You can only take things that are yours." I calmly told him every single item I was taking was mine, and that I had receipts to prove it. The final nail in the coffin was when I requested access to the arena's AV booth and the catwalk. I still remember the fear in his eyes as I went in and unplugged all the cameras I'd lent to my events team, all of which were clearly marked with my name. I felt like the Grinch, walking around and collecting everything that belonged to me. Driving away, I was heartbroken that a company I had given 200% to had decided to replace me with someone fresh out of college. But I won't lie, watching their faces as I stripped the place bare was deeply satisfying. Reflecting on it now, that was the worst and most toxic job I ever had. The company didn't even last another year before they folded entirely. I like to think I played a part in that. If they had just compensated me fairly and purchased the necessary equipment themselves instead of forcing me to supply my team, they wouldn't have had to start from scratch. Our next story is: You work 8 hours a day, and that's it. Since people have asked, here's a story from 20 years ago. I was a developer at a large financial services company, and due to the lack of proper tools, I often had to create various scripts, reports, and apps to automate the environment. Essentially, I built workarounds for the inefficiencies of our off-the-shelf tools. At my peak, I had around 300 apps and scripts in production. Given the constant requests from leadership and the need to keep everything running smoothly, I usually logged anywhere from 4 to 10 hours of overtime each week. Then, about a year into the job, I got a new boss. Her first move was to enforce a strict no overtime rule. I was to work only 8 hours a day, no exceptions. Since I wasn't a full-time employee, I didn't have much leverage to push back. My workday was now 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., including a 30-minute lunch break. Fast forward to later that same week. An upstream system changed their data feed, which caused a corruption in one of our downstream systems. This wasn't unusual, so I had already built tools to handle feed-related issues, but I still needed a few minutes to diagnose and adjust my code. As the entire operation ground to a halt, my boss and her boss were both watching over my shoulder while I worked on fixing the problem. I pinpointed the issue fairly quickly, but just as I was about to make the necessary adjustments, the clock struck 4:30. Without hesitation, I locked my computer, stood up, and said, "Well, it's 4:30. That's my 8 hours. I'll see you tomorrow," and walked out. The look of confusion, frustration, and disbelief on their faces was priceless. At that moment, all our overnight backups were stalled, and nothing would run until the issue was resolved. This meant that a global financial institution would go without data backups for the entire night, leaving it vulnerable in case anything went wrong. The next morning, I arrived at my desk promptly at 7:56, always making sure to be on time. My boss's boss was waiting for me and immediately called me into his office. In a calm voice, he said, "Moving forward, I'll manage your timesheet. You can work as many hours as you need." I left that job about 4 to 5 months later. Not long after, the entire building was laid off. Out of nearly 200 employees, only 2 weren't laid off. One of them was the person I had hired to backfill my position. After all, someone had to keep the code running. Our next story is: our manager wants to micromanage everyone and everything, perfect for us. The MBA, Master of Business Administration, is often misunderstood. Those with this degree are rarely true masters of business. Instead, MBAs frequently possess just enough fluency in buzzwords, jargon, and acronyms to convince HR departments they offer immense value. In reality, their actual contributions often fall short of expectations. My company was recently acquired. It had been a profitable business with a great culture, but the new owners felt it needed fixing. Their solution? Structure, hierarchy, and order. They brought in a new CEO who swiftly replaced our old managers and hired an MBA holder, Bob, to lead our department. The CEO's mission was to turn things around and ensure everyone fell in line. Bob, from the acquiring firm, didn't bother learning the ins and outs of the team or processes. Instead, he launched his reign of terror by ruling through fear, accusing us of inefficiency, demanding we work longer hours, nitpicking our tasks, and micromanaging things he clearly didn't understand. He loves to preach about MBA management strategies, leadership, standardization, metrics, AI automation, and anything else that sounds impressive on paper. But the key word here is preach. Bob doesn't lead or execute, he talks, but his understanding is surface level at best. As a result, we've all become yes men. We nod, smile, and stay silent in awe of his never-ending buzzwords. He takes every meeting right up to the last second, and when one ends early, he says, "I'm giving you some time back," as though he owns every minute of our day. Bob craves attention and wants to be involved in everything. So, we oblige. We ask for his input on every minor detail, even on things he knows nothing about. We CC him on every email, even those that don't require his involvement. Whether it's a simple approval or a conversation with vendors about credit applications, Bob is looped in. Since Bob loves meetings, we invite him to every one, even to discuss trivial matters. We make sure he gets plenty of time to speak about topics that have no real consequences. He enjoys hearing himself talk, so we let him. What's magical about this situation is how we've turned his need for control into a tool to make our jobs easier. By inundating ourselves with pointless paperwork, emails, and meetings, Bob feels involved and important, but we stay relatively idle. And the best part? By keeping him so busy, we've made ourselves virtually unfireable. TLDR, we've embraced our manager's obsession with control, created meaningless work, and kept him so occupied that we're all coasting through the day, unbothered and secure. Our next story is: she's not old, she's elderly. I was finishing up helping a customer who was planning an event at her church for kids, and she wanted to get some individual white balloons. She was as sweet as could be. When we were done, the customer went to the back of the line to pay, and I handed the small bag of balloons to the cashier. "Cashier, who are these for?" "Me, the old lady over there." A customer at the front of the line, who was currently being helped and had absolutely nothing to do with us or the lady, suddenly chimed in, "She's not old." "Me, what?" Customer, "She's not old, She's elderly. I didn't say anything to him, just rolled my eyes and got back to the balloon counter. You're also old, and you sure as hell look like it too. She's old, and I'm pretty sure she's aware. I'm going to get old too. Old isn't a bad word. Aging isn't a bad thing. I know multiple languages, and in most of them, calling someone the equivalent of elderly makes it sound like they're 1 foot in the grave and look like they're about to pass away. I'm sorry you only know English and are projecting your insecurities about aging onto a stranger, who likely can't even hear us because she's at the back of the line. Elderly doesn't even remotely sound more polite compared to old, which I guess is what this customer was going for. Also, just buzz off. I had even put a Gandalf wig on hold for you because of how nice you were to me over the phone. We're technically not supposed to hold the last item, but he was so nice, man. I would have said we were sold out if I'd known you'd make such a big deal over a neutral adjective. Our next story is if you don't like it, you can just leave. I've been with a home health agency for about 9 months, working 12-hour shifts on cases ranging from simple to complex. During this time, I've worked 11 unscheduled doubles and 42 additional 12-hour overtime shifts. I've taken exactly 2 sick days, 1 for myself and 1 for my kid. I don't call out, show up late, or cut corners as they sometimes suggest. I even take vacation time on my days off. I've saved them from failing audits on 3 separate occasions. I picked up so many shifts because A, the money was good, B, I genuinely care about my patients' well-being, and C, they begged me. The company often takes on new clients without enough staff to cover them, leading to a scramble and bonus offers for us to pick up shifts. These are government-funded jobs with big dough money. If they can't prove patients are being cared for, they're fined heavily, and too many fines will bar them from taking new dough clients. The company is incredibly disorganized. They have 8 schedulers, but we still get mass texts every day, at all hours, asking us to pick up shifts. They often double book or change schedules without informing clients or nurses. They also underpay for my area, $4 less per hour, which adds up. They rarely respond to questions, calls, or texts. I'd been looking around and found a company that pays more, has good leadership, and could place me closer to home if I completed their hiring process. I agreed and, while officially an employee for a month, hadn't started shifts yet. Now to the malicious compliance. I knew I'd be out of town for a few days and had 9 days worth of PTO banked. So, I decided to ask for 3 days off, assuming it would give them time to cover my shifts. I submitted my request on September 13th for October 12th, 13th, and 14th, a mini vacation for my family since I worked all summer. On Monday, I got a snarky email saying the deadline for PTO requests was September 10th. I explained I was trying to help by giving them extra time. The manager replied, calling me selfish for leaving her short-handed and rejected my PTO. On Tuesday, I went to the office to discuss it in person. I reminded her of my work history and intent to make things easier. She slammed her fists on the table and said, "You will work those days. I don't care if you have a trip planned to Australia, you'll be here. If you don't like it, you can just leave." Her smirk set me off. I stood up, took a mint, and said, "As you wish. I expect all my PTO on my next paycheck, per state laws. I hope you can fill the opening on such short notice." The look of horror on her face was worth more than the PTO payout. In the past 24+ hours, I've received 19 voicemails asking if I can come in because they're short-staffed. Tonight is my first shift with the new company. It's $6 per hour more, 48 minutes closer each way, and I get paid for 40 hours even though I work 36. Be careful what you wish for. You might just get it.
Next story. I'll call your bluff and take the marks. When I was in high school I wasn't very good at writing essays in English. I understood the concepts but fleshing out a few pages of filler wasn't something I could do in 45 minutes. One term we had a student teacher completing her practicum. Knowing how students treat substitutes and student teachers, she tried to avoid taking any nonsense but overcompensated. Several kids in my class either checked out or outright antagonized her, making her even more hostile toward us. For me, I checked out when I answered a question about a very specific term in a World War I poem. The poet used wheeled chair instead of wheelchair. I raised my hand and offered an interpretation that made sense to me since we'd been told there were no wrong answers. Instead of engaging, she shot back, "No, you're wrong." Noted. A few weeks later we had to write an essay on how did the author make you feel when reading text. By this point I was checked out of English class, not great at this sort of assignment, and in a mood to push back. So I wrote 2 paragraphs summarizing the text and added that I didn't feel anything while reading it. The following Monday, we got our essays back. and I received a 5.25. More than I'd expected, so maybe my 2 paragraphs had some merit. The student teacher pulled me aside, saying she was disappointed and that I could have done better since other students wrote 2 or 3 pages. It felt insincere since she'd never hesitated to tell me or others when we were wrong. She asked why I wrote that and I replied honestly, I genuinely didn't feel anything. Why pretend? She gave me a choice, take the fail or rewrite it. I'll take the grade. No point wasting time, I said. Her face dropped. Really? Are you sure? Yep. I'm no good at this sort of thing, remember? I didn't get it right in class, so why would that change overnight? Defeated, she sent me back to class. Later, I was called out to talk to my actual teacher. She asked why I didn't think I could do better. After talking, she told me I had to rewrite it, this time with a question that wouldn't let me say, I didn't. In the end I wrote 2 pages and passed, barely. The student teacher stayed on for a couple more weeks, and I noticed she stopped reacting with outright contempt and didn't try to match wits with any self-sabotaging teenagers. Bonus story about my actual teacher. She was really nice but, looking back, a bit sensitive. We had to come up with a TV pilot and present it. One kid read out the first episode of Burn Notice word for word and got top marks and praise. Next story. We need more detail in my annual performance self-appraisal? Sure thing, boss. At the end of every year, we have to do a self-appraisal as part of our performance review. Typically, it's a few questions about our goals for the past year. Did we achieve them? What challenges did we overcome? How did we grow? Etc. This year, I got a new boss who decided to raise the bar. Instead of the usual 5 goals, he assigned me 25, yes, 25 highly specific goals to accomplish. Since January, I've been steadily knocking them out, managing both short and long-range projects that covered multiple objectives. I actually did really well, all things considered, and even earned a promotion. So far, so good. Then came the annual performance evaluation. With 25 goals to report on, my plan was to draft a straightforward summary, organized by quarter, highlighting each goal I met and how it contributed to the team's progress. Clean, simple, and complete. Except, my boss had a different plan. He handed me an evaluation form, a monster of a document, with 6 sections and a total of 33 questions per section. That's 33 questions for each goal. You read that right, 825 questions in total, and each answer requires a minimum of 150 words. He gave me this packet last week, with a deadline of Thanksgiving. After struggling through the first few questions, I realized it wasn't just asking for a narrative, it wanted data and analysis, often multiple data points per question. It took me 2 full days just to finish the write-up for one goal, which turned into 12 written pages, 2 spreadsheets, and 14 graphics. After some quick math, I realized that finishing all 25 goals would take me 48 business days. I asked my boss if he really expected this much detail, and he just said, do it like I said. Alright, then, I cleared my calendar through Thanksgiving. No meetings, declined every project request in Asana, set my status to busy in Teams, and turned on auto-replies in Outlook. Full focus on the evaluation. Our VP eventually dropped by, wondering why I wasn't responding to emails or project requests. After explaining the situation, he laughed and said, yeah, your boss is a stickler for detail. Maybe he needs to learn to deal with reality. Carry on. So far, I'm up to about 130 pages of this epic self-appraisal, and my boss still hasn't asked why I'm skipping every meeting. Maybe this is actually what he wants, a team lead stuck in a pile of paperwork for 6 weeks. Whatever, they're paying me. Next story. No personal items at your desk? Sure, I'll make it as impersonal as possible. I work at a mid-sized company with an open-plan office where most of us have small desks. Our workspace wasn't fancy, but it was our own. We'd personalized our desks with things that made us feel comfortable. Family photos, small potted plants, motivational quotes, and even stress balls from company events. Enter our new manager, Sheila, straight from a formal corporate environment, with big ideas about professionalism and efficiency. Her first major change? A strict no personal items policy. Sheila emailed to say desks must remain professional and distraction-free, warning that any personal items left after a certain date would be removed. Frustrated, but complying, we packed up our photos, plants, and every small touch that made our desks feel like ours. But Sheila wasn't done. She began walking around, critiquing anything she considered unprofessional, even sticky notes or labeled drawers. She wanted a uniform, clutter-free look. At that point, we'd had enough and decided to make the office as impersonal as possible. Over the next few days, we systematically removed anything that added personality or function. First, we took down drawer and cabinet labels marking where supplies were kept, as they could be deemed personalized. Then, we cleared whiteboards of schedules, task lists, and reminders. Sam, the office organizer, removed all color-coded tabs and replaced them with blank, unlabeled folders. Our workstations became soulless, but we didn't stop there. We noticed that even company-provided items, like ergonomic mouse pads and wrist rests, weren't uniform, so we tucked them away. Some even swapped ergonomic chairs for plain guest chairs, as the ergonomic ones seemed too individualized. Soon, our workspace looked like a sterile call center with zero personality. It was, in Sheila's words, totally professional. Sheila was initially pleased, but then the consequences of our impersonal compliance became obvious. Without labels or reminders, no one knew where anything was, leading to constant back and forth and wasted time hunting for supplies. Simple tasks took twice as long, with people searching through identical folders and blank drawers. Clients visiting the office commented that it felt cold and uninviting, saying they missed the usual welcoming touch. Morale dropped, and everyone was noticeably disengaged. After a particularly frustrating day where Sheila herself struggled to find a stapler, she called an emergency meeting. She admitted we might have gone too far and allowed us to reintroduce a few labeled drawers and some plants. One by one, employees brought back their photos, plants, and other small touches that made the office feel alive again. By the end of the day, our workspace was back to normal, and we sent a clear message: a little personality and comfort can go a long way. Next story is: I just witnessed glorious malicious compliance. I am staying in Japan. I don't speak Japanese. I went down to the front desk at the hotel I'm staying at, and as I've often done on this trip, I pulled out my phone and asked Google Translate what time breakfast starts. The clerk reaches for his phone charging nearby, but his hand pauses mid-air. He glances at another clerk, returns to his seat, types something on the computer, and retrieves a printout from the printer. He then hands me a printout from Google Translate's webpage saying, "It starts at 6 a.m. Now, that's an employee who's clearly been scolded for using his personal phone at work if I've ever seen. Next story is: the third hand is the charm. Right after dinner, my 3-year-old asked to play video games. We started introducing him to a few games, and he already loves Sonic. Since he behaved well all day, we thought it was fair to let him play a bit. However, we told him he had to brush his teeth first. As a typical toddler, he protested immediately and asked to brush his teeth while playing. We kept telling him no, that he had to brush first, then he could play. After a little back and forth, this dialogue happened. "My lovely wife. Bud, how would that work? You don't have enough hands to hold the controller and the toothbrush at the same time." With the confidence of a 3-year-old, "Yes, I do." Her: "No, you don't. You have 2 hands. You need 2 hands for the controller and another for the toothbrush." "I have 3 hands." Her: "No, you don't." "Yes, I do." Her: "You know what? If you show me you have 3 hands, I'll let you play and brush your teeth at the same time." "Okay." He immediately leaves the couch, heads to the dining table, grabs a sticky hand toy he got for Halloween, and brings it back. "See? Now I have 3 hands." It was almost impossible not to burst out laughing, especially seeing the proud smirk on his face. He got to play while we brushed his teeth, a reward for creative problem solving. Next story is: every decision of care has to be run by you? Okay. Another post reminded me of this story. My mother was a nurse. She worked in the same medical/surgical unit for almost 30 years. Each year, a new set of medical residents would rotate through. Most of them were nice and eager to learn from everyone, including the nurses. But there was always an outlier. One afternoon, a patient on the floor had an issue. I'm not sure what it was, but it involved a treatment that a resident had ordered, which wasn't agreeing with the patient. No big deal. This situation wasn't new, and there was a written protocol for making adjustments. The seasoned nurses had handled it many times before. The nurse in charge made the necessary adjustment, and all was well. However, when the resident who had prescribed the treatment found out, she went ballistic, yelling at everyone about usurping her authority. She then declared that any changes to her patient's care had to be approved by her first. Alright, game on. For the next week, this resident was paged for every single thing, especially during her nap breaks on those grueling 36-hour shifts. This went on for 2 weeks because the resident kept complaining, assuming people would take her side. But when she realized that senior doctors and fellow residents weren't backing her up, she finally gave in and allowed the nurses to use their judgment. Moral of the story? Never mess with the nurses. Next story is: ashes to ashes. My sibling can be pretty awful sometimes. Not only did they sue me for control over our late parent's estate, but they also stole and sold off a lot of belongings, even while our parent was still alive. They couldn't be bothered to visit or even bring a simple milkshake when our parent was dying. I had to relocate to care for them full-time. To paint a clearer picture, this sibling has also shown cruelty to animals, especially cats, and hurt my beloved pet, who I sadly had to let go soon after our parent passed away. Years later, after initially agreeing I could have our parents' ashes, my sibling suddenly decided they wanted some of them too. I had given them the military service flag as a token, which I thought was fair, but the ashes felt different to me. I felt a strong sense of comfort and peace keeping them together and close by. Sibling didn't let up though. They pulled family members into the argument, people who didn't fully understand our history but sided with them anyway. After a lot of heated back and forth, I finally relented. Long story short, my sibling now may or may not have my late kitty's ashes on their mantle, under the impression they are our parents. Next story, daily mass and confession at my Catholic high school, or, how I kept my friends and myself out of trouble. I recently shared this story in another thread and was told it might belong here. Mods, please feel free to delete if it doesn't meet the subs rules. I was raised in a devout Roman Catholic family, and my siblings and I attended Catholic schools from kindergarten through high school. For this story to make sense, you'll need a basic understanding of the Catholic sacrament of Holy Confession. In Catholic belief, if you confess your sins to a priest and truly repent, the priest has the power to forgive your sins in the eyes of God. Most churches have confessionals for this purpose. Some are small rooms with chairs, but the classic confessional is more like a closet, with the priest in a separate booth next to you, separated by a screen. The bond of the confessional is absolutely sacrosanct. Think of it like attorney-client privilege. A priest is never, ever supposed to share or act on anything they hear in the confessional. Priests have been executed for refusing to reveal what was shared in confession, and any priest who breaks this bond could be defrocked, kicked out of the priesthood, and even excommunicated, removed from the church altogether. It's such a big deal that priests aren't allowed to act on information learned in confession, even if they later learn it through normal means. This part is important for my story. During my sophomore year, our Catholic high school's administration was taken over by the Salesians, a religious order dedicated to educating children. Our new principal was a Salesian priest who began holding daily mass every morning in the campus chapel before classes. Despite his efforts, attendance didn't really take off, just a few super devout teachers and maybe one particularly religious student here or there. Then one Monday morning, right after homeroom, we heard the not uncommon announcement over the PA, "Will the following students report to the principal's office immediately?" Usually, this meant students were getting in trouble for some weekend shenanigans. As a private school, we could be punished for that sort of thing. Someone threw a raging kegger, a parent called the school, and now everyone involved was getting punished. That's when I had my epiphany. The next Monday morning, I was at morning mass, bright and early, right at the front of the line for confession afterward. I sat down with Father Jim and confessed, in great detail, all the trouble my friends and I had gotten up to over the weekend, where we went, who did what, and to whom, everything. The first time, I think he was a little surprised, but he gave me some acts of contrition, said the absolution, and sent me on my way. I think, at first, he was pleased, like, I'm really starting to reach these kids, but by mid-semester, I'm pretty sure he caught on to what I was doing. Every now and then, he'd crack a smile or make a sly comment, but he couldn't stop me. By confessing everything we did over the weekend to our principal first thing Monday, I was putting all that information under the seal of confession. Father couldn't act on anything I told him there without risking serious consequences. If he went to his office and the first message was from a friend's mom, telling him she'd caught us all drinking and smoking in the alley behind her house, he could thank her for the info, but he couldn't punish us for it because I'd already told him about it in the confessional. This tradition lasted all the way through graduation. Some other students must have caught on, because by the time I graduated, Monday Mass was well attended, and Father had to start earlier to hear all the confessions before class. In the end, I don't know if it was me or Father who was guilty of malicious compliance. Did we play him by going to confession like he wanted, but for our own purposes? Or did he play us, doing some 4D chess stuff? After all, in just 2 years, he managed to get dozens of high school students to start attending Mass and going to confession weekly. Win-win? That's it for now. See you in the next post.